Hi folks, this is all the fruit, and as you can see, this year Easter has brought back the winter. Well, during the last week of March I was walking around, driving my bicycle, working mostly topless in the scorching sun. The first week of April, the temperatures are like 20 degrees colder suddenly. Since yesterday, we've had a lot of snowstorms, even here in the lowlands, and I'm sure that in the nearby hills you can already go skiing. Well, during the last days I made a lot of videos about fruit tree flowers. Here in front of me you can see a plum tree, which has fortunately almost finished flowering. I think this plum tree managed to flower in the warm season, in the warm week, during last week. Yeah, but what in general about all those flowering fruit trees? What does this return of winter mean for them? Well, of course, during the snowstorms and the cold, there are not so many insects outside, so many of them will not be pollinated, but the snow is actually not the biggest problem. The problem is the frost. I'm here in the upper Rhine Valley, which is basically the warmest area in Germany. It's one of the mildest areas and one of the areas with hottest summers. And so the combination of both makes it basically the warmest area and also the best suited for the cultivation of wine and fruit. However, we have a thing called late frosts in this area, and they usually come, towards the end of March or the beginning of April. I've had a lot of winters here where during the winter there was not much frost, but then, either in the last weeks of March or sometimes even in the first weeks of April, you get those frosts. Then you can get again frosts in the beginning of May, but usually they don't affect us here in the Rhine Valley too much. They affect the rest of Germany, but the frosts in more or less around Easter, they affect the Rhine Valley disproportionately. And so despite the fact that we have basically the best climate for fruit cultivation in all of Germany, and that the Rhine Valley should dominate the German fruit market, there are also other areas which are quite successful with fruit growing, just because the Rhine Valley is not so reliable. After harsh frosts in April or March, a lot of the fruit tree flowers and flowers of other crops and also young plants of other crops might die. And so other areas will get a bigger share of the market. Well, as I said, a lot of the fruit, for example, most of the plums managed to more or less finish flowering during the warm last week of March. Well, I think cherry trees and pear trees, they started during the warm days, but now they'll have to continue during those snowstorms and night frosts. This morning we had quite a lot of frost on covering the surfaces around here, and so I'm sure that it killed a lot of fruit tree flowers. So it might actually be a problem for cherries and for pears and for a lot of other less widespread fruit. What about the apples? Well, the apples are quite a special case. Actually, in Germany, the flowering of the apples is officially considered the start of the phenological spring. And they didn't flower last week. Even though we had temperatures for over 25 degrees for several days, and the apples kind of started developing their leaves, they didn't really develop their flowers. They were onto something. They knew that we're gonna get a return of winter for a couple days. Well, starting tomorrow it's supposed to get a little bit better. So although it felt like summer last week, the apples basically refused to officially announce the beginning of spring. And they were right, because now they will have a lot less trouble than the cherries and the pears, which basically have the peak of their flowering season now during those days of snowstorms and nights of frost. Well, during the next days I'll go out and check for damages to the cherry fruit, pear fruit and other, flowers, basically the cherry flowers, the pear flowers and other important flowers. I'm really curious which ones will be heavily damaged and which ones will survive this cold spell without any significant damage. Yeah, stay tuned for the video on the frost damage after the 1 week of summer. And yeah, of course, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.